We have a very special keynote speaker this morning, Dr. Frannie Leautier. Frannie is a friend and a colleague of mine and has very kindly agreed to speak with us this morning. She is very much both an academic and a practitioner in the area of sustainable development, starting off her career as a civil engineer, studying engineering in her home, Tanzania, proceeding to MIT to do her master's in transport and a PhD in infrastructure systems. And then a very long and successful career in the World Bank, where she rose to the level of vice president and head of the World Bank Institute between 2001 and 2007. After that, Frannie was the executive secretary of the African Capacity Building Foundation, based in Zimbabwe, and most recently has assumed somewhat of a different role, and that is to be the CEO of Mkoba Private Equity. So it's a very, very interesting career and progression. I have the pleasure of working with Dr. Leautier in the Uongozi Institute, which is an institute dedicated to leadership in sustainable development in Africa, based in Dar es Salaam. We both serve on the board. And in addition, Frannie is a member of the Leadership Council of SDSN. So she has a lot of interesting things to say, and I believe she's going to focus this morning on Africa, on the achievements and challenges of achieving the Millennium Development Goals, what this means in terms of the post-2015 agenda, and what it might mean for private equity and the role of private equity going forward. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Leautier.
Good morning, everyone. When I was coming to speak here, my voice gave up on me. I have laryngitis, so I'm going to do my best to project my voice, but I have some visual aids that are going to help us move along in case my voice breaks out during the presentation. So I apologize for that. Thank you. It's wonderful to be here, and I would like to thank Glenn for that introduction, very warm introduction. We served together on this board on Uongozi Institute, and one of the questions we always ask ourselves is how to create leaders who are comfortable and confident in leading through sustainable development, and how do you build that cadre of leadership, how do you support them, and what kind of systems are important to help them succeed. So today I'm going to talk about that from the point of view of Africa, and I don't know how many of you have children who love Buzz Lightyear. I thought this topiary of Buzz Lightyear was a good indicator for Africa today because it's green, and it's also looking forward, projecting forward, using science and technology and looking ahead for sustainable development in 2015 and beyond. And one of the things that strikes you when you look at Africa is why did Africa succeed in some areas, yet it failed in others? And what were the reasons for that success and failure? So those of you familiar with the SWOT analysis, this is kind of a quick SWOT on the MDGs. And you see that Africa is on track in a number of areas, in fact has done very well on primary education, gender equality, on HIV and AIDS, and on global partnerships. But it has failed or fallen short in a number of areas, particularly those related to food security, so agriculture, food production and agribusiness, Health, in fact, the current crisis we are facing with Ebola is a good indication that this is one goal that really needed much more attention than was given. Transport and logistics, which are key for all of those sectors, but also energy and climate adaptation. Now, in doing and achieving those goals, where are the opportunities? Even as we have a few months to 2015, what remains there that can be done that we still have time to do? Well, first of all, 15 of the top 20 countries making the best progress on the MDGs are from Africa. So this is very important to note. And secondly, at the moment, at least, Africa has the wherewithal because 7 of the top 10 fastest growing economies are in Africa. Some say 9 of the top 15, so depending on how you count, these are the IMF statistics, so I use those. But there are a number of threats, and the first one is poverty, and eradicating poverty, which really has not moved very far. Child mortality, still a big risk. Maternal health, and now with the Ebola crisis, they are combined and they become a bit more serious. And then, of course, environmental sustainability and assuring that. So the question I wanted to put forward today is, how can we prepare Africa for post-2015? What are the areas we should put the most attention? And then where should the agenda go in terms of focus for results? So here are the detailed factors for success. And when you look at them, you realize that the equitable growth and delivering sustained and equitable growth is one of the factors that cause those countries in the top 20 to succeed. They were able to grow equitably, and they were able to maintain political stability. So these were the 2 most important factors. And the solutions that they employed in actually getting there came mostly from small and medium enterprises. They employed them in a variety of areas which generated the economic growth, both in domestic and regional economies. And they also were supported by local consumption patterns, which helped in the movement in the indicators of the MDGs. But they created jobs, they were able to trade with their neighbors, and they were able to generate export income. So there's a number of issues that still remain critical. All of these remain critical for the countries that haven't quite made it. But you can see how each of the countries did in this UNDP report that came out that ranks the 20 countries in terms of their MDG performance. So I won't go into too much detail, but the countries are listed there. So let's look at the ones where Africa did not make much progress. And the first one is food security. And look at the areas where Africa made progress by, say, using the small and medium enterprise to see what is the interface that failed in countries that did not make it. So you look at food insecurity. We know that it has an impact on health. And in order to succeed, we need to focus on enhancing the distribution part of food. That means logistics and transport, but also markets and so on. And particularly, not only in rural areas, but also in the cities. And the cities are growing very, very fast in Africa. But related to that is adaptation, right? Because the weather-related shocks have been one of the biggest risks that has faced the agricultural sector and created food insecurity problems. Now, why and what role do small and medium enterprises play in that? The first, we see that those who depended on the SMEs to deliver in that area, it was linked into the productivity of agriculture. When you look at how small companies were able to improve, for example, the value chain in agriculture, that's where the kick came in. It created good price signals for farmers. They developed the food products. There was a lot more value added in terms of preservation and conservation of food, but also in the transportation side. And this productivity sophistication interface is what helped the countries do well. So all 15 countries in the top 10 best performance in terms of meeting the MDGs globally, they managed not only to feed themselves, but also to export food. This is a very important result. And the food exports, which you can measure them in different ways, but I look at them as a share of merchandise exports, was high in most of the top performers on the MDGs, but particularly in a few countries. And you look at countries like Rwanda and Burundi, both landlocked countries, but doing quite well on the food production side. Kenya, even Cote d'Ivoire, despite the crisis, was able to meet those goals, and Uganda. So what's interesting about these countries is most of them have had challenges in terms of the productivity in other sectors, but not in agriculture. And the countries that have made tremendous progress on the SME side are also quite interesting. You have Botswana, where more than 94% of the firms are legally registered, the SMEs. And that means that the other countries can follow and go through this path of success. So who is doing well in that area? You see, again, progress has been made tremendously in Kenya, Rwanda, Lesotho, Mozambique. And so the rest of Africa can catch up and do the same. Let's look at agriculture and trade and see what has happened there. We know that almost all of Africa is highly dependent on agriculture. And the countries are more dependent on agriculture because that's one of the few sectors that can create jobs. And you look at the importance of jobs post-2015, you see that becomes very, very critical. So those who have succeeded again, we see the word there, sophistication of the agricultural sector. Those that did well in sophisticating the sector, mechanizing, creating strategic value chains, they also did well in job creation. And those that had better transportation and logistics networks and communication as well. And the factors that jump out is the size. The bigger the sector is, the bigger potential it has to create jobs. But also how attractive it is to young people. Because a lot of the young people who are more educated don't want to go into agriculture. So those countries that succeeded in exciting them into agriculture also did well. And finally, the market opportunities, those that were able to expand them, particularly in regional areas like Burundi and Rwanda, selling to their neighbors and so on, were able to succeed. Now, trade is not mentioned very much when we talk about sustainability, but it shows that trade actually made a very big impact. It delivered the opportunity space for job creation, particularly in agriculture. It has given birth to a wide range of types of jobs. You can work as a farmer, but you can work as a transport carrier, you can work as a manufacturer, and so on. And it can help countries who are dependent particularly on smallholder agriculture to sophisticate their sector by using more science in agriculture. And this is very important, especially for climate adaptation, fertilizers and other inputs, including mechanizations and irrigation. So all these factors depend on trade, and particularly not only trade in goods, but also in services and merchandise trade. This is just the data that I mentioned. It gives you in numbers what I just said in words. And you see that trade as a share of GDP was above 50% for nearly all the top performers in the MDGs. So that is very, very important. And the countries are listed in a variety of areas, but it's true for food exports, it's true for formally registered companies with operations, it's true for trade as a share of GDP, but also the other areas where we expect to see those results, like household consumption and the services sector. So regional integration is the other area that a lot of people in Africa believe is a solution to helping post-2015 to get results in many more of the goals. And the policies and programs that are particularly relevant are those that support entrepreneurial small and medium enterprises that can modernize agriculture. So we're still with this agricultural interface. And there, this is possible because the small and medium enterprises, when they succeed in one village, they can repeat that success in another. And through their regional linking up is how you get results. You get repeatable success at scale, one company at a time. And also those value chains are very critical for exciting young people to join up. So you see, for example, in Kenya, people are managing their milk production through their iPhones, You can know exactly what your cow is eating and what the likely milk production should be, and send people to milk the cow while you are working in the office or somewhere. And the young people are now excited to join in those activities because it gives them this possibility to be in the cities but still be involved and engaged in farming. Modernization is another key area, and there you see mostly retail level, modernization in the retail activities within agriculture. You have many examples, for instance, in the most sophisticated warehousing systems that have come up, and how they can use warehouse receipts to give a signal to farmers on how much to spend and how much to grow in a particular area. And then international trade in agriculture, because Africa is becoming now, and could be in the future, the world's food basket. It has that capability, arable land, lots of fertile soils, and opportunity to produce. And the service companies that have grown have created these cross-country networks. When you come into Africa now and you drive in any of the countries, you see multiple trucks just going through, carrying all sorts of cereals and grains, potatoes, fruit and vegetables and so on. But they can do that because storage and packaging has improved, and the financial services to that sector has improved, including mobile payment systems. Because now when you go to Tanzania, you can buy tomatoes on your cell phone. You don't need to go to the ATM and get cash or to even visit the bank. So most of these goods and services and the markets that have been created in Africa, they are provided by SMEs that can take advantage of the growing consumer income and consumer products, and can then use that to then expand the services to a broader swath of the population. So here are the opportunities for intra-regional trade. You see some of the examples of the countries in the top 20. And this is just the household expenditure as a share of GDP, which gives you the possibility that exists in that area. And with the growth of African middle class, which has been predicted now across the board by the ADB, by the World Bank and others, there's a lot of opportunity then for cross-border trade. And all countries that have made it to these top 20 performers have done so because they were able to tap into this growth in household consumption patterns, and vice versa. Right? So this indicator is an interesting one because it measures the market value of all the goods and services, including durable goods. And two durable goods are moving quite fast in Africa now: refrigerators and cars. And these are very important for food security because that's what helps in the rural areas. For instance, for transport, refrigerators help to preserve food for periods of time. So the fact that they go hand in hand is a good indicator that there is room, therefore, to contribute to food distribution and preservation, amongst other factors. And most countries in Africa at present import such durable products, and that's where the trade dimension comes in. And there's, interestingly enough, because failure of cars and refrigerators, when the prices of imports are very high, generates a whole new sector at the retail level of repairs. And that's job creating as well. So you can see that some of these dynamics show up in different ways. Now, I've talked a lot about the small and medium enterprises and the private sector. What's the role of the public sector in all of this? First, if the public sector can focus on ensuring that the public expenditures are efficient, they can be stretched to provide more of the infrastructure, education, and all the other factors that are critical for development. Second, the public sector can channel and prioritize investments better so that they can support these value chains and therefore help deliver on some of the objectives that have not been met. And the public sector can be very good in driving the change in infrastructure and energy in particular. I'll give you an example. In Africa today, you find Tanzania, for instance, has the largest share of cervical cancer in all of East Africa. And most people go to health diagnostic clinics to be diagnosed for more complicated diseases. So you find that a lot of countries are grappling with the diseases of being poor, but also for those that are coming now with being more wealthy and the changes in diet and lifestyle that comes along. So health diagnostic services are in very high demand, but they rely on energy and they rely on transport. So the public sector can channel investments into those areas that would help in supporting infrastructure around energy and transport. And then, of course, if you improve the diagnostic and health system side, you can then avert many of the challenges that are now impacting on child mortality and maternal health. So in order to push forward on those two MDGs before 2015, work could go into channeling investments in these areas. All these services could contribute tremendously in pushing in those two goals. The other big issue is governance. And here I think that's very important that I look at only one dimension of governance, which is the effectiveness of public spending. And you look here, for instance, at the transport sector, you see that this is a bulldozer, which this is very common. I was driving the other day going from Dar es Salaam to Lushoto, and there's only one bridge you can cross on the Wami River, and there was an accident. 2 trucks had knocked each other, and the bridge was closed. So you couldn't get across to the other part of Tanzania because that's the only bridge that you can get across. So the risks in the transport sector are very, very high. And the role of the transport sector as a share of the economy is quite high, as you can see in these, in the example of these countries. So if you can target less corruption and more efficient production of infrastructure and supporting services, particularly in transport, it could alleviate a lot of the problems. And this gives you just an example, but it's true across the board, whether it's sea, air, or rail, because the risks in the infrastructure sector touch on many other of the MDGs. The other area is decarbonization. And here you see that investing in SMEs could actually boost the chance of meeting the decarbonization targets. How? First, because SMEs are innovative. In all countries, but particularly in Africa, they are very innovative, and therefore they could be early adopters or adapters of technology. Second, a lot of progress can be seen, particularly when you look at customization of solar products. When you travel across Africa now, you find people using solar panels for all sorts of things. A woman who plugs her sewing machine and raises her productivity because she can sew much faster using the solar panel on her sewing machine. Cell phone chargers, you've heard about that. In many countries, the cell phones are charged on solar panels. And the innovation in how just the SMEs have used solar panels in Africa shows you that there's a possibility to actually leapfrog in a number of technologies that would speed decarbonization in a number of ways. In some countries, actually, solar production is almost at grid parity. So that tells you how much advancement there's been. And there's also room for distributed energy. It is true that there are many other ways to invest in the energy sector, but particularly when you look at mechanization of agriculture and the size of Africa and how big it is and the cost of building transmission networks, you realize that there'll be opportunities to support clinics, diagnostic centers, and other areas through investments in distributed energy. But this requires partnerships, because the SMEs cannot do it alone, and neither can the public sector, so it requires partnerships across countries, but also between Africa and the rest of the world. They would be very trade-enhancing, greatly trade-enhancing, if those partnerships could be built. And success in achieving them would depend on policies. So the role of the public sector comes in again, particularly in terms of debt markets, because a lot of these SMEs take debt in order to expand their activities, but also in access to finance for SMEs and the local capital markets as well. So now let me turn to private equity and to show with you this morning that I believe private equity can be one of the spearheads to push forward in this area. And as Glenn mentioned, I come from 15 years in multilateral development at the World Bank, then worked for capacity building in 49 countries in Africa, and now I'm in private equity. So you ask, what's there in private equity that would attract somebody who spent so many years in the public side of things? And I think it's because private equity can be a very effective instrument to provide finance. We know that. The US has demonstrated that over many years. But in the case of Africa, particularly because small and medium enterprises cannot afford the debt payments that they get through loans, and therefore private equity gives them breathing room. So imagine if you can channel private equity to deliver sustainability objectives. First, it will be sustainable, because private equity, by definition, has to be sustainable. Otherwise, you lose your shirt when you invest, right? So investors are very careful to make good choices. And secondly, because the returns would give signals as to where there are opportunities. And so there's an important role there. So at the fund that we just launched, we believe that not only are there difficulties in accessing funds, but the interest rates are unaffordable to this level of small and medium enterprises. The domestic financial markets are very shallow, so they cannot offer the sophistication that would be needed otherwise. And private equity funds are concentrated right now. You find them in South Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, and a few places. And so the rest of Africa is really not served. And so our strategy was to say we will invest in small and medium enterprises in countries with underdeveloped markets. And those tend to be post-socialist, Ethiopia, Tanzania, Mozambique, where the markets were suppressed because of socialist policies, but also post-conflict, like Rwanda and Ivory Coast and so on. So that's the approach that we take, and we focus on making sure those investments deliver not only financial results, but also sustainability results. So how are we addressing this? The first area said, okay, I'm sitting here with the Sustainable Development Solutions Network on the Leadership Council. Is there anything that our fund can do to push forward on those themes that have come up? So that's the first area that we looked at. The other one, there's a very exciting initiative that has been launched out of London called the Earth Security Group. And they have country-level indicators that map out the Earth security from a sustainability point of view. And the indicators there are very useful because there's a dashboard that tells you where are the highest risks, and then you are able to target and channel those areas. And then, of course, there's our own due diligence process to satisfy impact investors. So on the Sustainability Through Finance Plus, which is our logo in terms of the uniqueness of investing in SMEs for sustainability, many of the companies that we seek to invest in, they are coming from countries that are growing very fast, 7% and above, but those companies themselves are also growing very fast. And therefore, if you can tweak their strategy and have them leapfrog into cleaner technologies, into better footprints in terms of impact on jobs, on inclusion, and so on, that will deliver faster results because of those two indicators. And then most of them are active in the import and export area, so that would also help create these dynamics, particularly on the agricultural side, but also on health. And not all of them are mature companies, so there's also opportunity for greenfield and doing things in a very different way, particularly on climate mitigation and adaptation. And investment in these sectors has very important contributions to make to the MDGs, but it's highly reliant on trade and highly reliant on regional integration. So this is what, in a simple way, Finance Plus is. You engage in those areas that are linked to sustainability, that match, say, the SDSN themes. You do that by either value-creating acquisitions, by sourcing sustainable exits, by supporting companies to meet objectives in key areas or targets of sustainability, by tracking how they're doing in the different areas, by advising on environmental and governance issues, but also by supporting joint ventures and helping them get off the ground, managing and helping them build capacity to actually move in a sustainable direction, and then leveraging expertise. So all these areas can be tailor-made to these companies and to support them to move down that area. And so we work only with investors who are interested in seeing that happen. And that allows then the private equity investments to be matched to the sustainability objectives. So here's an example. These are the 12 SDSN themes. And on the right-hand side, you see how, as a fund, we're trying to match up to those areas. So for instance, on the macroeconomic theme, we look at measuring and managing and tracking the portfolio and getting indicators that can be benchmarked globally. So that allows us to track how our portfolio of companies is doing on a global scale. On poverty, investing in fragile and post-conflict countries. Most of the countries we invest in are either fragile, post-conflict, or in these cases, post-socialist as well. Social inclusion, there we are investing in SMEs. 65% of SMEs are women-owned, so that helps on the gender dimension. In terms of early childhood development, we are focusing more on the transition to work part because of jobs that will be created through these companies and partnerships with young people in particular. On the health side, we are targeting mostly pharmaceutical and companies and health clinics that are linked to achieving of the maternal and child mortality objectives. And then on decarbonization, it's mostly on greener technology, agricultural value chains, forest value chains, and then, of course, housing. Housing is a big issue. When you travel to most of the African cities, you realize that there are very precarious living conditions in the city. So you can't talk about sustainability in cities without looking at housing. So waste collection, urban transport, and housing upgrading become very important there. And then supply chains to the oil and gas industry, if those can become more sustainable, even though oil and gas itself has the fossil fuel footprint, but the supply services around them don't have to. They can be much greener. Tracking indicators at the company level and linking them to investments so people can see that these are good investments to make. And then, of course, private equity itself is a tool for transformation, one company at a time. How is this linked then to this Earth Security Group, and how do we fit in within that? The Earth Security Group has these types of charts, as you can see there, and the peaks show you where the risks are. And these are the indicators that they collect on land, on population, fiscal issues, energy, climate, crops, water, and food. And what we do is we take those country dashboards and we match up to the goals at the company level that we are supporting. And because the investments we seek to make are on industry leaders or sector leaders, over time that would move the country indicators in the right direction. And this just gives you an example. So that's the portfolio, sample of a portfolio. The company is a transport company in DRC that you can look at the emissions profile. If you change the entire bus fleet, for example, to be a much cleaner bus fleet is an example. Urban housing, where you can look at access to water and waste collection. Waste collection itself, where you can introduce better techniques for recycling and use. Like in Rwanda now, there's no plastic, but then there's a lot of paper. So there's still challenges in recycling that. And then, of course, pharmaceutical areas, which are very good for job creation and health. So I'd like to conclude that it is true that Africa has made tremendous progress in terms of achieving the Millennium Development Goals, with a number of countries in the top 20. A number of challenges remain, many of which require action by the public sector, but also by the private sector. Small and medium enterprises can do a tremendous job in pushing forward in achieving those remaining objectives and contributing to the post-2015 agenda. And that to do that, we can do it one company at a time, which is a sustainable policy in and of itself, because that could be good in aligning countries to their broader objectives. It goes beyond what was defined for 2015. It allows progress, particularly on the goals yet to be achieved. And more importantly, it can help push ahead for deeper transformation. We know that African economies have to transform, otherwise there's no chance post-2015 to meet any of the other goals. Thank you for your attention, and I hope my voice was projecting clearly enough this morning. Thank you.
Okay, we have some time for questions. If we've got a couple of microphones there, if anybody would like to come up and pose a question. Yes, please.
Klaus Leisinger from the Global Values Alliance Foundation. On the very first slide, I was missing the word improving governance. I've worked in Tanzania for more than 25 years, and I had the problem, the further away you get from Dar, the less you can rely on basic infrastructure from the government and on good governance. So why not mention this at the very beginning? Because it's a fact that the problem is also there.
Joe Spidell, UCSF Bixby Center. Sub-Saharan Africa, now about 920 million people, is projected to be over 2 billion by 2050. How do you see Africa coping with this level of population growth?
Okay. Yes.
Hi, I have two questions, and one, you talked about the importance of modernizing agriculture in order to increase productivity, for example, through using fertilizers, etc. And I would like to question the sustainability of that and ask whether it doesn't make more sense to promote more agroecological approaches to agriculture, where you increase productivity, not necessarily by modernizing agriculture, but reducing the use of inputs and kind of having a more holistic and diverse approach to farming, which is, I would say, is much more sustainable and resilient. And secondly, you also were promoting, you talked about benefits of international trade, and I would just want to highlight that there are also many drawbacks of international trade, because it's has a lot of increased risk, and since international markets are highly volatile and vulnerable, and is subject to a lot of fluctuation, so doesn't it make more sense to focus on local and regional markets, because that's also much more resilient? Thank you.
Okay, we'll take one more and then we'll have a second round, please.
Thank you very much. I've been doing quite a bit of work into Northern Africa and Western Asia with UNDESA, trying to look how water scarcity and agriculture and energy can work together, and there's a lot of the issues you've raised here. But we're trying to do it in the context of the Sustainable Development Goals and how that goes forward. So I guess I'd like you to respond first to where there's that real drought-challenged area where the water might be one of the biggest determining factors. And secondly, how you think the presentation you made might shift or grow in the context of the current SDGs if they become approved.
Thank you for these excellent questions. On the governance one, I didn't put it in the first slide because what I've learned when I left Africa in '84 and have spent more than 30 years outside of Africa, and I went back, and you start your first conversation with governance, everyone freezes up. Because people feel that it's an agenda that is not developing locally from the bottom up within the countries, and therefore if you push it very fast up front, people sort of close up, and then you can't have a conversation. So I did have governance, but not on my first slide. And I think this is, it's a lesson learned in terms of how people react, because when you talk about effectiveness of public spending, nobody quibbles with that. If you talk about making sure information is available and that people have choices and their voices are incorporated, nobody quibbles with that. So the quibbling comes when you throw out the word governance from the beginning, and then people sort of hide back and sort of withhold going forward in a conversation. I think this is the reason why I don't usually start with governance as the number one priority and risk in presentations, but I did have it in my other slides. Population is going to be a very interesting factor for Africa. In fact, I remember speaking to an audience in Europe recently, and I said that in the future, to be young is going to be African. And that is true. If these trends continue, then the global majority of people under 25 are going to be African, right? So to be young in the future may be to be African. So this is a very powerful image to have in mind because it can be a very good benefit, because that's where youth, innovation, and ideas are going to be. It will also be where, if you need human input in terms of labor and contribution, that's also where it's going to be. But it could also be a risk, and this is one of the areas that we are particularly focusing on, and that's why job creation becomes so important, but equally important is education. Because having a larger population that is not educated, that doesn't have the right nutrition and health status, is a huge risk. And of course, one that is not employed. So I think your question is a very valid one, but I look at it from the positive side, because I think if you do it that way, you can put in place the key policies that help you move in that direction. And our contribution from the private sector point of view is on the job side, particularly for young people. On sustainability and whether there's a trade-off between mechanization and modernization versus agroecology, you find it's very interesting because it's not an either-or in some cases. For instance, if you look at agriculture in the hilly areas which are subject to soil erosion, then modernization can actually help prevent soil erosion, but that requires you to think of other inputs into agriculture. And a lot of modernization of agriculture uses sustainable inputs. For instance, composting techniques that use science in a very modern way. So when I talk modernization, I don't necessarily mean chemicalization. It could mean modern composting techniques, right? Or modern soil erosion prevention techniques. So agroecology is very, in my view, quite modern. I think some of the old techniques have been proven to be improvable. So to modernize doesn't necessarily mean to mechanize in all cases, but sometimes you would have to do that. And by mechanization, I look mostly at the agro-processing side, because that is critical to preserve, because eating fresh is not an option for everybody, but eating foods that are healthy can also be eating processed foods, and that's where you need some kind of manufacturing capability and mechanization. On trade, most of my talk focused on regional trade, but I also think it's important to look at international trade, because not all countries are food secure on their own, so we need international trade for food security on a global level. And it's true there are variations in terms of commodity markets and prices. They're very volatile, but there are many instruments also that can be put in place. You can think of stock exchanges that give farmers signals. You can think of insurance mechanisms that protect farmers from downside. So I would not hold back on international trade because of volatility. Rather, countries could develop instruments that protect farmers from volatility and those risks. Water is a very, very big factor, and I think this is one of the big risks that we face. But again, I look ahead. There's a study that was done recently that showed that actually Africa has the largest supply of clean underground water, fresh water. So mining water is most likely going to be one of the next big sustainability activities. We're mining oil now, but in the future, mining water may become very, very feasible, particularly in those countries that have rich freshwater supplies under the ground. But you are absolutely right that looking at risks in the water sector is important, because You cannot move on irrigation, for example, if you don't look at the water sharing between urban and rural areas and the efficiency of different technologies. So, for instance, drip irrigation, there are huge advances in that area. A number of companies have come up with really advanced technologies that could allow you to irrigate just appropriately. So there are opportunities to function within dry areas, and you see many countries have done quite well in that. Look at what Israel has been able to do over the years and many of the technologies there, but also the Peruvian highlands and in many other areas. Indonesia has done very well on the opposite side, because now with climate adaptation also comes flooding, right? So managing floods becomes an important water management issue, and that is also a risk factor to look into.
Maha Damash from the American University of Beirut. I'm actually going to build on the first question. In one of your earlier slides, you mentioned that those who succeeded in achieving the MDGs managed to have political stability. Well, we're in a world of great political instability, and I was curious as to if there's been an experience of leveraging these issues and these examples you've mentioned towards encouraging better stability.
Good morning. John Dilliard from St. Francis College in Brooklyn. Two quick questions. One, how many assets do you have under management? And do you have any thoughts about how to tap into the African diaspora as a potential source for investment funds?
Good morning. Labo Depopola, University of Ibadan, Nigeria. I want to agree with you absolutely that agriculture holds the future for Africa. But there's a problem. I speak as a teacher of the subject, a researcher, and a practitioner. Agriculture is just not profitable. In most of African countries, the input prices are very high, the produce prices are very low. And most of the governments are running away from subsidies. Without subsidies, agriculture cannot grow. Money will not grow on farmland.
My name's Tamara Lawrence. I'm with the International Peace Bureau and also with the University of Bradford. I'm curious as to your thoughts about the announcement that was made 2 days ago that the U.S. is going to establish its Africa Command in Liberia, considering all the progress that has been made in Liberia, and also the announcement by the U.S. that it's sending 300 soldiers to deal with the Ebola outbreak. I think it's the last thing that's needed is more soldiers there. And then the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute showed in its latest yearbook that Africa and Asia are showing increases in military spending. So I would like to know what you think about this increasing militarization on the African continent and how that's a threat to sustainable development. Thank you.
All right. Again, a very good set of questions. On political stability, one of the things that we have learned is, first, when people see the statistics, they're quite impacted by them, that those countries that did better did that by being stable. But when you look at the list of the countries that are in that top 15, a number of them were in conflict not many years ago. So I think the key issue, and this is what we focus on when we talk about working in fragile states and post-conflict countries, is that the upswing that you have after political stability steps in or comes into being is what you really have to leverage, because that's where you can embed a lot of those positive dynamics going forward. And I think this is the way that we use this type of presentation, is more to focus on the upstream, because when you look at most development aid, it does not go in the early months after conflict has been dealt with into supporting the private sector or the small and medium enterprise. It focuses a lot more on the public sector. And I think these results are very telling, because they show you that even at that stage, investing in those small and medium enterprises could be a very good use of development aid. And that's how we use this argument. We are a first-time fund, So our assets under management will be fully determined by the end of this year because we are waiting for a few other investors to finish up their processes. But our first time close is for $150 million with a longer term objective of about 300 million, because that's the level we think can be sustainably invested. It's a very, we call it return on effort, right? The ROE, because you work a lot, very hard to get sustainability results in private equity. It's much easier to make money investing in breweries and cigarettes and so on. So we work much harder for the results. The African diaspora has, so far we have involved the diaspora by having people come back, myself included, to join our fund. But also we have a small window, but it's a bit early in terms of collecting investors who want to invest from the diaspora. We have not focused much in the first close because it's very time consuming to collect small investment. But through work I'm doing advising another colleague, he's using crowd funding to bring money from the diaspora for the lower end of our investments, because we take $1 million to $15 million of private equity in growth capital for those companies. And a colleague of ours is working at the lower end, and he's using crowdfunding to collect money for investing $100,000, $500,000 in private equity. I think you're absolutely right that agriculture is a challenging sector to be profitable. But I'm a farmer's daughter, and I grew up on a farm, and I think agriculture can be run as a business, and it can be profitable even for the smallholder farmer, because the farm I grew up in was a very small farm, so it's not an estate or a big farm. And the reason is that if you can channel government subsidies to go in the right direction, for instance, to support farmers when commodity prices swing, and channel the subsidies in that direction, or to invest in improving infrastructure to the rural areas, building warehousing and storage systems, supporting the growth of companies that would service the rural areas, helping farmers to do better grading of their products so they can fetch a better price for coffee, for example, or tea or cashew nut. I think this is where subsidies should go, because it goes in the right direction. And done that way, agriculture can be a very profitable business. And I know it myself because from the age of 14, I used to be the one to take our coffee to be sold. And it was not much production, but because we focused so much in making sure it was a top grade, AAA Arabica, and you get very good prices for that. That's what educated my siblings and myself. So I know agriculture can be profitable, and even at the smallholder level. But you're right, subsidies have to be smart, they have to be targeted, and particularly if they go to manage risks and support public infrastructure, it can help a lot the farmers to make money out of agriculture. And the last area I would say is pricing, because most politicians push to have urban prices very low, because that's where they get the support during elections. And if you don't, if prices go up in any city you saw, for instance, in Maputo, or even in Douala and Yaoundé, you get people on the street. So politicians don't like prices to go up in cities. But that has a negative impact on farmers. So there could be a better way to handle subsidies at the pricing level, which I think needs to be looked into, because it unusually hurts the small farmer by keeping prices low for urban residents. On Liberia, I will not comment on the US decision, because this is not a decision that I'm involved in. It's US foreign policy. But when you look at what has happened to Liberia, some of you may have seen President Johnson Sirleaf pleading for international support because she felt that her country may cease to exist. Right? Even the head of the defense ministry said the same thing. So there is a security issue that needs to be handled at the same time as a health issue. What we are doing, and later on you'll be hearing from Madame Binta Diop, a small group of us are working together with the diaspora to do to support these countries that have been hit by the Ebola crisis so that they can focus on the health systems and strengthen the ability to handle those risks. And you can see that in Senegal, for instance, there was one case that was observed and it was treated and the risk has been managed. So that means it is possible, and the issue is capacity of the health systems and being able to support those. But because, as you know, in any country when there is a shock to the system, people who want to destabilize the situation step in at the same time. That's a risk that has to be managed, and it is a military risk or a security risk in that sense. But the focus we are having with colleagues, and this is outside of my MCOBA work, is to support the response strategies in the countries that have been hit by the crisis of Ebola. And that is true also for military spending across Africa. One thing you would have noticed is that when you look at the statistics, Africa has actually become more stable over the years. And probably investing in some areas of strengthening security becomes important. Look at what Nigeria has to do now with Boko Haram. That requires spending on the military. So the increase should not necessarily be seen in a negative way, because there are real risks that countries are facing, whether it's Mali or Nigeria or any of the other countries that have had to fight very hard with the current crisis that they're facing. So I haven't looked at the details, but I would just say from just looking at what's been happening in those countries right now, they would have to spend more militarily to manage the situation. In the long run, of course, that means investing in jobs, because if you had more jobs in the northern part of Nigeria, they may have been, the risks may have been maintained, investments in education, and really the MDGs that we're talking about here, to have more of a regional or sub-regional focus country by country, so that this is averted in the long run. So thank you very much for your questions.
Okay. So yesterday I mentioned to some of my students there that don't miss the 1 hour keynote this morning, and they said, well, we've actually got a recitation and we won't be able to make it. And I saw this flurry of emails flying around, and apparently it was reorganized so they all came here. And I think they would agree with all of you and myself that this has been a terrific, very deep but very wide-ranging presentation on Africa, where it's got to now and where it's going in the future, and the potential role of private equity in being part of the future of Africa. So we're really grateful to Frannie for joining us, and we look forward to continued discussions with her in the future. So thanks very much.